Calling all units, calling all units. Donut Shop has a fresh dozen. Go ahead and take a 1040.
Hey, what's up, guys? I'm back with another episode, and this week we have Detective Heidi Chance. I said that right. I didn't actually even go over that with you, but
yes, that's right.
Yeah. So Detective Heidi Chance, and she's going to talk to us about human trafficking, and then her work that she did as a detective and as a police officer, and then now currently as a keynote speaker, and then conducting trainings. So let's kick it off, and welcome, and thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. This is awesome.
So it's cool. So do you talk about actually, do you name the police department you used to work for, or is
that's okay. Yeah.
So Phoenix Police Department. I know Phoenix is a pretty busy city, from a lot of stuff that I've seen, documented and everything. And so, how'd your career go, and kind of, if you can give a little bit of background for everybody for that.
Yeah. So I started in the academy in 1996, actually, as a cadet. It was a new program that they had. I was only 18 years old. They had, they had just brought it back, and I was the first female they ever had, because when they had it before in the past, it was just male officers. But it's a civilian position with the intent to kind of like an explorer program where you go through and work. You actually do work. It's a paid position though, and you eventually go to the academy for realsies. And so I started at 18 in a light blue shirt with pepper spray, a baton, radio, and a little badge. I had badge number 2. And I was driving a fully marked patrol car in South Phoenix, if you're familiar with South Phoenix.
Wow.
And I was flagged down on all kinds of crazy stuff. But basically, I did that up until I was 20, and then I went into the academy to become sworn and graduated in 1999, January of 99. So I went straight out of the academy to Maryville Precinct, which is in the West Phoenix area, mostly residential, but a lot of non-English speaking individuals that, I had to pick up Spanish pretty quick. I kind of lost it. You lose it if you don't use it all the time. And so, but I could conduct probably a traffic stop still. And then I started a family. And so I decided to, I think most female officers make that choice, to kind of get off the road for a little while. And so 3 years in, I had my son. And when I had my son, I transferred to school resource officer. And then I blinked and 6 years went by.
Yeah, same. I did that same sort of thing, and it went by real fast in the schools.
Yeah. And so basically, my interest in sex trafficking actually came from when I was an SRO. I was at a middle school, and it was 7th and 8th grade, 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. And I remember one day, because we can't take the police car home, I had to turn the keys in every day. And so I remember walking past the juvenile holding area, and I saw this girl that I recognized when she was in 7th grade. She's still a juvenile on that day, and she, was attitude with the patrol officers that had her in there. And I just popped my head in and I asked her, "Why are you in trouble?" And she recognized me as the cop from her school, and she told me she was under arrest for prostitution. And this was back in like 2005, 2006-ish. And, I had already been a cop for 6, 7 years. And I thought, wow, how is this girl in trouble for prostitution? How does this happen to kids? Obviously, I knew it happens, but I didn't realize it was an issue that kids got involved in. And so that's what sparked my interest in, at the time, it was called the Vice Unit. And they were investigating sex trafficking, but in a way that, we don't do anymore, where the 3 squads that were available to transfer to had only one female allotted position for each squad, because their main mission every day was to go after prostitutes and arrest prostitutes all day long, until we had a case that kind of came to light. It was actually a victim that met an 18 and 19-year-old at the park, a male-female suspects, that convinced her to run away from home, and they had her held up in their apartment, and they literally had her contained in a dog crate, and men would come to have sex with her at the apartment. And so basically the mom, was adamant that she thought her daughter was at this apartment complex, and officers went and responded and searched for her multiple times. And finally, on the third attempt, they had located her, and she was actually in this like enclosure under a waterbed where she was
Uh-huh.
threatened, to keep quiet and locked in there. And they didn't see her the first two times they went in to look for her, and ultimately found her. And so that kind of really changed at least Phoenix Police Department's view on especially children getting involved with trafficking. So my perspective in all of this is kind of unique because I witnessed and took part in the original, we're going to target prostitutes, and now we've kind of evolved to focusing on sex buyers and traffickers, and this evolution of, hey, we should probably use female officers for this because that's how you get the sex buyers and the traffickers. And so I've had, a really great career working as a female undercover, and I was in the vice unit that changed to the human trafficking unit a few years ago. For almost 14 years. So the better half of my entire 25-year career at Phoenix Police Department was in that vice unit. So I had a great
Wow.
time. Yeah.
So I mean, I can assume like the normal, you see and you hear about, the when a female officer goes undercover, and you see on TV shows and stuff,
Yeah.
just, they do the role play where they're going after Johns and people that are picking up that kind of thing. How, if you're going undercover looking for potential people that are dealing with sex trafficking, because there's a lot of layers to it, right? Like there's not just, there's your buyer, or the person that's like looking for the product, and but then you've got your other people that facilitate it, that look probably like normal everyday Americans. Like people think like, all right, prostitution, like you can pick out prostitution, Pretty Woman or whatever, that kind of thing. Julia Roberts in a movie, and then you have a like a pimp, and then you're picturing, a pimp or something like that, or somebody that's working that person or that prostitute. But with the trafficking, I feel like it would look differently, or you're not going to see it as easily.
Yeah. So I actually have a unique perspective in that regard as well, because when I first started doing temporary assignments with the Heat Unit, we focused on the streets because Phoenix does have a lot of street prostitution. The areas for the street prostitution, just for general knowledge, is called the Blade or the Track. And we probably have about 5 blades in Phoenix general area where you could go, and sex buyers, John, sex buyers know where to go to find a person to purchase for sex. So my perspective actually started when we expanded into doing online advertisements. Back then it was Backpage.com. And I actually participated in, some of the first UC operations where you had female officers posting ads consistent with what ads are out there on Backpage and other prostitution websites, and participated in, where men would come to our hotel room and we would engage in a conversation where they committed the crime of solicitation, and we'd take them into custody. And, that is a different dynamic than just walking on the side of the road posing as a prostitute in the streets. Both are dangerous. I mean, I've had buyers with guns, knives, pepper spray, tasers, all the things. And then obviously out on the street, this is also part of our evolution of this issue. In the beginning, when we were out on the street or even in the hotels, if a trafficker, a pimp, they're one and the same person. If a pimp approached us, we would look away. We would not talk to them. We would walk away, because that's what, through victim interviews and things, we learned that you would be reckless eyeballing, violating some rule if you engage with the trafficker. Whereas now we do engage with them. We let them try and recruit and groom us, whether it's out on the street or in a hotel room or based off of one of our ads or all of our undercover social media profiles. And we can talk about the internet and how it's participating in this problem in a little bit. But my perspective is now we're engaging with traffickers, and we've learned so much about the game and the lifestyle and how things work. And I think that's really expanded our investigations and our ability to conduct better interviews and all those things, because we're engaging in these undercover operations.
Right. So you would probably think, like, in the past, because females and males, just police officers in general try to be, our alpha, or try to come off as alpha. So they're making eye contact with every person, because we're reading everybody's physical and mental profiles by making eye contact and working with them. But in that industry, they probably have to be a little more, submissive. And so there's probably a switch when you're having to go undercover to really, like, make sure you're conscious of that, and you're not, looking alpha, or you're not, looking strong,
Oh, yeah.
at least to those individuals. Maybe to the Johns, okay, or the customers, the buyers, but is one thing. But when it's that person who's supposed to be in charge of you, I'm sure it's a little bit of a mind mess, to try and deal with that, right?
Yeah. So for me, and this is where I come in later with, all the training that I do, because I literally was involved in my first time ever doing this out on the streets, a 20-minute, hey, conversation, this is how this goes. And then I was out there, no training at all. And I think that a lot of female undercovers could probably say the same thing, because there wasn't any female undercover schools or anybody training. You just kind of learned in the moment of doing. And so, yes, engaging with these guys now, when I present and train female officers, I tell them, we have to maintain officer safety at the same time as be believable as a, prostitute that's standing on the side of the road. So blading your body gun sight away, or, being too far on the other side of the extreme, leaning into a car is very dangerous, because they could grab a hold of you and start driving away and dragging you along. So it's a fine line between officer safety and then also being a UC. And it's one of those things, just like you said, a switch that you have to kind of switch back and forth, especially when you, because at my unit, I didn't say this yet, but there's only 9 detectives for the 5th largest city in the United States. So we have to, we have to wear the hat of, hey, we're doing an undercover operation this morning. We're going to, pose as prostitutes on the street. And then we have a juvenile that walks past us. Well, now we have to switch, and we have to have a male undercover engage with that juvie. And if we rescue that juvie and she wants to, do an interview, then I have to change modes from being an undercover to, I'm a forensic interviewer, and I'm going to interview this juvenile now. And then we're going to move on to going and busting down doors and getting the bad guy. So it's absolutely switching back and forth, and that could happen in a shift in a few hours.
It's crazy, and that's a lot of times what happens with a lot of law enforcement and all kinds of units. But that's to do that with 9 in a larger metropolitan city, which is Phoenix. I mean, it's not a small place, and it has a lot of people coming through it, with sports teams and events and stuff. It's not somewhere that is just doing nothing. So with this training, and we might as well talk about it. You offer training, and you teach for undercovers for females. Do you teach undercovers for males, or is it just kind of primarily for females for this specific role?
Yeah, so I do a class in general on, obviously, UC stuff, but I think having a male undercover talk about experiences that they've experienced. I mean, I cover it a little bit, but I would rather co-teach with a male UC detective for the males, because, you want to hear from someone who's been in the hot seat. And for a female, I'm not going to want to learn from a male undercover who just watched. I want to know the girl that sat on the couch and got grabbed by the guy, what she did and how she, avoided that from happening the next time. You know what I mean? So it's kind of a very unique thing that I don't think even nationally there's very many female undercovers teaching about this. And I know that a lot of people think it's easy. You just walk on the side of the road, you have a conversation, you walk away. I've had so many experiences that I like to integrate into my classes to show things that went bad, times that we had our decoys get assaulted, dangerous situations, all kinds of, tactics as far as the conversation itself, because a lot of these guys they're hobbyists, meaning that they are sex buyers who do this on a regular, and they want to avoid getting caught, but the excitement of getting caught is still there. And they have forums and they talk about our undercover tactics. Like, we used to touch our hair, and I had a guy literally the
Oh
second
yeah.
I went to touch my hair and I was just itching my head, he like was, "You're the police," and he pulled away from me, and I was like, "Okay, so we're gonna change our UC deal signal, and we're not going to touch her hair anymore." You know what I mean? So they
Yeah.
put out our tactics. So it's harder and harder with these guys who participate in this activity every day. So training
And
is imperative.
and what's, just for anybody, and I'm asking too, what's the, aside from trafficking, and what these, women or men could be, victims of, that are doing the prostitution, like why do we need it off the streets? Like, why does it have to get cleaned up?
Yeah. So I think a lot of people don't really even understand what human trafficking is. So maybe if I
Mhm.
just back up and
Yeah,
define
you
that,
go.
because
Yeah,
they get it confused with smuggling, and they're two different crimes.
good.
So
Yeah.
human smuggling is a crime against the state or the border, actually, and that involves an element of consent and transportation from point A to point B. Human trafficking involves uh, a crime against a person, and that crime could be forced sex or also forced labor. Now, someone who's being smuggled along the way of point A to point B, if they're a victim of being forced to do sex acts or forced to perform labor acts, then they're a victim of human trafficking, but there's two different crimes. But for human trafficking, both sex and forced labor, I have to prove three things have happened. One of these three things: force, fraud, or coercion, if you've ever heard that. Force
Mm.
is pretty self-explanatory. That's going to be some kind of violent incident involving like a beating or scars or visible sign of injury, bruising, that kind of thing. The fraud and
Yeah.
the coercion are harder to explain and prove. When we think of the fraud, these traffickers are very manipulative. And even to go beyond, before I expand on that, in my opinion, in my experience as an expert in human trafficking, there are different types of trafficking going on here. We've got more organized trafficking with like the brothels and the massage parlors and what's going on at the border and the cartels. And then you have individualized trafficking, where you have the typical street pimp who's trafficking other individuals. Most of my experience in inner city of Phoenix is the street pimp. Um,
Mhm.
I've got a little bit of experience, obviously, with massage parlors and brothels, but not the border necessarily, because I'm in inner city Phoenix.
Yeah.
But as far as the street pimps, the force and I'm sorry, the fraud and the coercion come from their manipulation. They sell this dream: I'm going to take you shopping, I'm going to
Mhm.
get your hair done, your nails done, we're going to live this amazing life, I'm going to take you out to expensive restaurants like Applebee's. Just kidding. But I've been told
Yeah.
that before by
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
they're trying to dangle this carrot of this amazing life that we're going to have. You just have to do this right now. You got to stay down before you can come up. You got to do what I tell you to do before we can get all that. And that those instructions are going to be, that you're going to have sex with men for money and give that money to me, and I'm going to hold it for you, and we're going to invest in this life that we're going to have. That's the fraud. The coercion, I equate that to the threats. The threats are very real. Initially, when a victim's being recruited and groomed, a trafficker is going to try and learn everything about them. And you're thinking this person's interested in you, like in a relationship,
Mhm.
but really they're trying to learn where your parents work, where your siblings go to school, how old are they, what kind of vehicles they drive, all the things about you and your life. They're trying to inquire about all that so they can use it against you later. These
Yeah.
threats that these traffickers try and threaten, they are very real to these victims. And a trafficker, I've coined this phrase, I should copyright it, but a trafficker is the most reliable person you will ever meet. If they say they're going to beat your ass, they're going to beat your ass. And so they need their victims to believe that what I say is going to happen. Otherwise, these victims wouldn't stick around. So all of this is to say that this force, fraud, and coercion is going on, and that's how these victims are getting stuck in this situation, and they really are not free to leave.
That's, I mean, it is a big thing, because these people have to know that this is exactly what's going to happen, and it sometimes, for a lot of them, takes a long time for it to really click that they need to get out of it. And I've seen you say on a couple interviews just that. Uh, where did I go? Because this part I didn't write it down, but you jogged my memory on that one. But because they move around so much, the traffickers end up having to move around so much and change locations, because regularity can sort of, when people start to see the same thing at the same grocery store, the same diners, or the same restaurants, the same Applebee's, they're going to get to know you and maybe ask questions and sort of be able to read you a little bit better too.
Yeah, so they're very transient, and they do that because they don't want to get caught by the police. So they don't stick around very long, so they're constantly moving from city to city, state to state. And then also, they don't want their victims, who don't even see that they're a victim themselves, they don't recognize it yet. They don't want them to get to know a normal person, maybe at the hotel or at the McDonald's that they've been going to, because that normal person might say, hey, this seems like a pretty messed up situation you're in. What can I do to help you get out of this? And so they don't want that. So they keep them very isolated and constantly moving around. So then that way they don't have the opportunity to leave, because that would be losing out on their money.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, we'll take a quick break, and then I want to talk to you. We mentioned it a little bit before, sort of some of the transition from off the street to maybe even part of the internet, and how it kind of goes down on the internet. So we'll take this quick one, and then we'll be right back. Hey guys, I'm sure that there's many of us that are aging, and we've thought about hormone replacement therapy. I visited my doctors and discussed it, and I'm still kind of on the fence and not really sure what I want to do. But now I think I've kind of found it, and I know that we could all use a boost of testosterone in our life. Well, check out the best in the game, Human Performance Team. It connects you with doctors via telehealth, and you could submit your labs that you've maybe already done, or you can get fresh ones done. They offer a variety of services like primary care, urgent care, weight loss, and even mental health. We all know that, these jobs weigh on us and our mental health. Jump over to hptrt.com and use the code DSP for a continuous discount. Use the code DSP and get on a road to better health. And we're back. So the internet, I was talking a little bit about before, and I would believe that, it's on the streets. The streets can obviously become violent, either from customers, or if you just want to consider an arrest violent, or because the arrest is sort of stopping the flow of money for anybody in that. The internet is kind of boundless as far as the flow of money. Like, how is this kind of rolled into the internet, and like, what should people kind of look for, or what could they look for when it comes to the internet?
Yeah. So people ask, how do these victims fall into this lifestyle in the first place? And most of it is these traffickers are very skilled at looking for vulnerabilities, vulnerabilities in anyone. I have a case that we can talk more about later, but it's basically a case that took 5 years of my life, and it ended with a trafficker being sentenced to 500 years in prison. But in that case, there was 7 victims, 2 juveniles. And when people ask, well, how did these victims fall into this situation? It's a familial trafficking, this case, where it was the uncle trafficking his niece and his 17-year-old stepdaughter. But what's unique about it is the mom of the stepdaughter met him in her 40s. She was a Department of Corrections officer working at the prison, lost her job, and then became a stripper and met him. So her vulnerability was losing her job and then getting involved heavily in drugs. In that same case, one of the other adults, barely an adult, 19 years old, she is at Northern Arizona University. Her mom's a nurse. No history of any sexual abuse or any child neglect, child abuse, nothing. Well-off family from Scottsdale. She's online and she meets a guy on Craigslist who wants to take modeling pictures of her. And unfortunately, that guy introduces her to the trafficker, and then he turns her out. And then now her entire life that was going one direction is now going the other direction. And she's a resident of Perryville Prison right now for her drug problem and some other things that she did. So the way that this is happening, as far as and what her vulnerability could have been, is low self-esteem or something about her self-esteem. But traffickers really look for vulnerabilities, and they're out on the streets looking. That has not stopped. But the internet allows for them to anonymously recruit and groom all over, and all over the United States. And the way that I know this is because I have myself, as an undercover, 7 Facebooks, 4 Instagrams, tagged, Meet Me, Bumble, Plenty of Fish, Snapchat, TikTok, all of these accounts in undercover profiles. And I've engaged with traffickers trying to recruit and groom me. And they're not even just in Arizona. Like, I had a guy from Orlando that I extradited all the way from Orlando to Arizona based on our conversation over a period of months, where he was recruiting and grooming me. And I charged him with a class 5 felony, and he's never seen my face. And all of that to say is I've done a warrant, for that conversation that we had. And what I found is the message that was sent to me in private messaging was copied and pasted and sent to hundreds of profiles every day that we were talking. So it's just them casting a fishing line, trying to see who will take the bait, and they'll engage with that person. And it doesn't even have to be a local person. So that's where it's very scary about the internet, and how easy it is for traffickers to just sit on their ass all day long and be on their phone and on these apps and be actively recruiting and grooming potential victims. And those potential victims could be kids.
So somebody like that, like say the guy in Orlando, for instance, is there any chance of you to, or, you're the persona, becoming physically involved with this person? Or was it a strictly internet based, like the person may not ever actually physically get harmed, but they may become exploited through the internet or through social media?
Yeah, that could happen too, especially with the ability to open up an OnlyFans or a Patreon, online video-based thing, where this trafficker convinces you to do that, but then they're going to take their cut. And OnlyFans is also taking a cut, by the way.
Yeah.
So there's no doubt in my mind that there are people who are on those platforms that are also being exploited, 100%.
And so does that falls in the line with trafficking, even if it's just like a digital footprint or of a physical body, or like the pictures that somebody might share or videos they might share for this person, but they're exploiting them, and that kind of puts it into the trafficking realm, even though they're not physically with them?
Well, when we look at the definition of force, fraud, and coercion, if they're being sexually exploited, that would fall into the definition. So it's just a matter of, unfortunately, we have kids who are 17 seeing all these girls on social media saying they're making millions of dollars on OnlyFans, and they want to be, an OnlyFans girl when they grow up. But there's also instances where juveniles have found their way on OnlyFans, and obviously that's a crime in itself as well. So it's dangerous as hell right now for our kids on social media and on these platforms and what they're exposed to.
So like if you're able to talk about it, if it's a case that's cleared and stuff, the guy in Orlando, like, so was he then intent on coming over or coming wherever you were to meet you or that kind of thing? Like there's those then too that are like, hey, because they might pretend like they're from somewhere, but they're actually like maybe down the street, and they're just getting you comfortable to where they're going to come and, recruit you, or I'm going to take you away from this family that you don't like anymore, that you're upset about, and we're going to move, and I'm going to care for you, that kind of thing. Was that something that guy from Orlando was going to eventually do?
Yeah. So most of the traffickers that I've experienced offer to send me a flight or, a Greyhound bus ticket or however, or come get me. Yes. And so it's one of those where I'm establishing in the conversation the elements of the crime prior to them
Yeah.
arriving. Because I do not look like the girl I'm posing as on my social media. But I've had to become a very good liar and a solid backstory on a lot of my profiles. So then that way there's history, because I've had these traffickers literally go through all of my friends on the undercover profile. Why are you friends with this girl? Why are you friends with that girl? Why are you friends with this girl? She snitched on this other pimp in Baltimore and he's in Orlando. And how does he know that? Because they're connected as well. I don't think law enforcement realizes that these guys also are connected. They have forums and groups, and it's kind of a different thing than it was before, where they were very territorial and they would shoot each other over a corner. They're kind of partnering up now, and they're partnering up and traveling together and doing counter surveillance together and all these things. So he knew. And what's ironic about that girl that he was asking me about, she's the undercover profile of one of my sister squad detectives, also in Phoenix. So how did he know that that happened, that guy got caught up through catfishing, basically?
Wow. Yeah.
What I'm describing is catfishing pimps. And, they were that connected that they knew. So we need to do better about sharing information and talking to each other and attending training and, keeping up on all of these things, because there's even more things going on with these traffickers than I think we're even realizing.
Yeah, I mean it's crazy. The internet, is kind of a wild, wild west, because even for me on the road, getting calls of just fraud, like a whole different realm. But they're talking to people. They're talking to people in assisted living facilities, elderly people that are lonely, and then they're just committing fraud by having them send money and send it over to them, or giving them access to their accounts and stuff. And so the internet it becomes a very dangerous place, and that's where for kids, one of the things that I'm sure you probably explain and that you work on is being able to, pay attention to the kids and talk to them. Can you, kind of tell us a little bit about that? Sort of what you preach on that?
Yeah. So when I'm out doing not only law enforcement training, but I also do community awareness training to groups, organizations, businesses, and all of that is with the intent. I have my own ulterior motive. I'm trying to reach as many potential jurors as possible, because I need those people who are serving on the jury in my trial and in your trial and in anyone who's listening who's got a case. We need this jury to understand that when I testify that this person's freely walking down the side of the road with a phone in their hand, they are not free. They can't just call the police, and they are still trapped. And I need a jury to wrap their head around that and believe that they are a victim of trafficking, and that this will continue if we don't get this bad guy. But to your original question, which was
just kind of like what you want to preach to like parents and stuff, and sort of kind of back with the internet type stuff, like what they're watching for with the kids.
Yeah. So in speaking to the community also about this issue, I usually go with the fact that I was around so far long ago that the national average age of entry into sex trafficking was 15. Today, the average age of entry into sex trafficking is 13. And in my opinion, in a few years from now, or even now, we're seeing more 12, 11-year-old kids getting trafficked. And that is all because of the demand, the sex buyers wanting kids. So the traffickers are looking for kids to give them to supply the demand. So when I talk to parents about this that are in these audiences, I keep telling them you need to have these conversations with your kids about not only sex trafficking, but kind of what you were talking about, sextortion, even any of these crimes that could occur on these devices and games and social media platforms when parents are giving their kids access to these things. And so I've had people ask, well, how do we have that conversation? And so that's why I wrote my book, because that is what the book is about, is a guide to have this conversation with your child. And I'm talking 8, 9, 10-year-old child, where it's still appropriate, but also a necessary evil where you need to address with them. If someone's talking to you on your social media app and they're asking you personal information about yourself, your last name, whereabouts your house is located, what your parents do for a living, that's all stuff that should be giving them this cringe feeling like someone's trying to know about where I live. And then also, obviously, if this person is trying to say, hey, keep our conversation secret, delete our messages, use this emoji if your mom walks in the room, all these things that they do to, try and not get caught, but continue on the conversation with this child. Parents need to have the conversation with their kid about that happening so that when it does happen, because it will happen, they can recognize it and
Right.
self-police themselves and then say, hey, wait a minute, this is probably a bad guy like my mom told me about. And not only will they not continue to converse with this person, but they'll also tell their mom or their dad about this happening. And that's what we need, because we can't do it all alone. And when we, law enforcement, meet you and your child, the thing's already happened. And I'd much
Yeah.
rather have it not happen in the first place. So that's why it's very important to me. The book is called Talk to Them, and it's about having these conversations.
Perfect. Yeah, that was going to be my follow-up question. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's because it's called Talk to Them, and then that's on Amazon and on your website, right?
Yeah, yeah. Anywhere where you can buy books. And I've got plans to. I have a female officer I met on LinkedIn who's actually an officer at the college, and she's a actual translator. So I'm having her look it over, and she's going to help me translate it in Spanish, both in the print form as well as audiobook form, because I think it's
Oh,
very important to reach any demographic we can reach. And these kids are all vulnerable, and it's especially vulnerable when you have parents who don't necessarily speak English, but their kids are speaking English for them, and they're exposed to people who are trying to manipulate the situation, and those parents won't know what's going on.
yeah. That's probably got to be a tough one when you have parents that don't speak English, and then these kids are, they've learned it in school, or they already knew it. Yeah, and they're just sneaking, and then the parents really don't have a way to, really read the English if their primary language is Spanish. That's got to be extraordinarily tough. So yeah, I was in my research. I saw some talk about Frontline episodes, the TV show Frontline that you did when or that you were involved with in Phoenix, talking about trafficking in the United States and about how it's different than what other countries experience. So what's the difference between like a trafficking outside of the United States versus what we see here in the United States?
Yeah, so if you've seen Sound of Freedom,
Hmm.
I equate that movie to, an amazing job that they've done about awareness in general about human trafficking, but it isn't really what it looks like here in the United States, and especially, like Pretty Woman or Taken or some of the other movies you've seen.
Hmm.
Those are, giving an example of what a one version of it looks like, but typically, and there's a lot of myths surrounding how this happens. An abduction, like in Taken, isn't, 90% of it isn't going to happen by a kidnapping. So having the opportunity in 2019 is when the movie came out. It's called Sex Trafficking in America. And it was Frontline PBS that filmed our unit, and they followed us around for 3 years. And
Wow.
yeah, they did it 3 years because we actually did a juvenile rescue, and they wanted to see that case all the way through to the resolution of these three traffickers that pimped out this little girl who met the trafficker on social media. And it basically is a really good depiction of some of the proactive undercover operations that we do, both out on the streets and in hotels, and really gives a good example of female undercovers being used to target traffickers and sex buyers, as well as this case. So it's on YouTube as well as the Frontline PBS website.
Okay.
It says episode whatever. It was really only the one documentary. That's just how they call their documentaries. But
Oh yeah.
we're really proud of that movie, and it's they did a great job showing the reality of this.
That's cool, and it's good. We've got a lot of nowadays, like, real true stuff with, being out there, and like things like even TV shows like the First 48, and even live PD for, a little bit of it. They don't show all of it. First 48 does a little bit more of showing the beginning, and then it kind of explains the end of what ended up happening. But that's pretty cool that they were able to stick it out for 3 years, and that you guys were able to put that together for them to get a full documentary or a full movie episode out of it. That's cool. Let's see. Let me take quick one more break, and then we will come right back. I didn't have this one queued up. Here we go. Brand new Donut Shop podcast hats. Excited to bring them to you. Very excited for the work that went into them. They're super cool. They have this PVC patch on the front, stitched on, Donut Shop Podcast logo, a nice blue line snapback. It's got this laser mesh on the outside. Comes in black. Sweet baseball cap. You can wear it flat bill, curved, whatever you want to do. Oh, and the inside is nice and soft for those sweaty Florida days or wherever you are. You can get these hats. I'll ship them out, $35 shipped. Just hit me up in the DMs. Let me know. If you're international, we can work something out on shipments. I also have these patches in just the patch with a Velcro back. So those are $12 shipped. Thank you very much, everybody, for the support. Real excited to see these hats out in the wild. See you later. All right, we're back. And so I wanted to follow up a little bit more on the undercover training that you offer, or other training classes. Do you travel for them, or are they more local? How's that work out?
Yeah, both. So I've had law enforcement agencies hire me to kind of do a training and then consult when they ran their undercover operations. And I did that virtually, and I obviously could do that in the physical sense, being flown out there. But my trainings are, I have like a whole bunch. I do a whole class on patrol recognition, because I don't know if when you were in the police academy, if you had a class on human trafficking.
Highly doubtful.
Either. Yeah. So there's so many agencies that their own patrol officers don't realize that when they're responding to a loud noise complaint at a hotel, it isn't just shut the music down and threaten, if we come back, somebody's going to jail. It could be an actual human trafficking situation. You just have to look for it and know what you're looking at. And so I do a patrol recognition class. And also we want patrol to limit their questions if they do find a human trafficking victim to just the who, the what, the when, the where, because we don't want this victim to tell the patrol officer what happened to them. Then they have to tell the detective what happened to them. Then they have to tell the victim advocate what happened to them. Then they have to testify about it. We don't want them to be repeatedly telling their story for many reasons, but it re-victimizes them. And we also don't want it to be where they tell that patrol officer a detail that they forgot to tell the detective, and then it comes to the trial and the defense says, wait a minute, you told this person one thing and the detective another thing. You're a liar. Jury, how can we believe this victim?
Yeah.
So we don't want any of that, to avoid that. So it's very important that we, really go over all the reasons why, limited questions, but also be empathetic and build rapport and take their story to the detectives. And then I do a class on forensic interviewing, because I'm a forensic interviewer. It's not like an official, you're blessed to be a forensic interviewer class, but it is a different type of interview with a child sex trafficking victim versus a regular child abuse or child sex assault victim. The child's abuse and sex assault victim, those kids are probably coming forward and disclosing. Juvenile child sex trafficking victims, typically they are out on the street, they're in love with their trafficker, they're not disclosing, they're not cooperative. It's a whole different thing. And so learning how to build rapport with them and get to the point of where you're conducting an interview that's both trauma and informed with the victim not getting re-victimized and not putting them in a position where they feel any kind of further trauma is an important thing. And then I do a class on interrogating these types of suspects. I have a unique case that I go through. Each one of these, I do a case study along with my instruction. But the case study for the interrogation class is really focused on a sociopath and a psychopath. And I have that going on in one case between a trafficker and his wife, who actually tried to kill this kid to protect her husband. So total crazy
Wow.
case that I talk through, and it really shows the difference between psychopath and sociopath. And then
Yeah.
I have a class on putting these cases together for successful prosecution. What kind of evidence you need, those kind of things. And then I just developed a new class based on basically going after these traffickers for more than just a victim-based case, because I am one detective in one part of the world, and I've had 4 pimps that I've put in prison who got out and went right back to pimping. And a lot of that is because they weren't put into prison for longer sentences. They took bullshit pleas and all the things, because those happened a while ago before we had informed juries and informed prosecutors and everyone doing a better job. But in my lesson from learning about these pimps not really changing their behavior, even going to prison, I've decided to start helping detectives and investigators really learn how to do financial crimes investigations against these guys so that we can seize all of their stuff. If we take all their
Oh,
assets, when they get out, they're not going to have shit to come back home to, and they really aren't going to be able to get back on their feet and go back into the trafficking world. And it really take them out at the knees is what I'm hoping to help reform their behavior, because prison just isn't doing it. So that's the new class I have going on, and I follow a case that actually came about. This trafficker that I arrested in 2014, right before I retired from Phoenix, he was trafficking again, another kid, and she actually testified. But if she wasn't, I was still doing the financial crimes investigation alongside my victim-based case, and he got sentenced to 108 years.
wow.
So, and that's one victim.
Yeah.
So it's really important to, do all the things that we can do to get these guys.
No, I mean it's that's a good way, because some of us just we get really defeated with a lot of these things, and that's a great way to kind of take a step back and look at it and go, what are these guys really in it for? And a lot of times it is for the money, or I would think. And so if we can take that and use the current tools that are available, but associate it with this crime, and just like you said, just
Yeah,
make them start from scratch. If they truly just aren't reformed, they're at least starting from scratch, and it's going to be easier for you to catch them than when they're probably masked and have the availability for funds to keep up what they had been doing that put them in jail in the first place.
yeah, it's
Wow.
intimidating because, obviously to seize assets, you've got to do a seizure warrant, you've got to do all these financials, you got to
Yeah.
determine where all they do banking. I have one trafficker that has literally 18 different banks and money service apps like Chime, Venmo, PayPal, Apple Pay, all those things going on. And so I have to subpoena all of that, and I have to
Yeah.
look through all of that and put this all together. So it's a lot more work, but inspiring them with the outcomes of 100 years,
Hmm.
and telling the story of how that was possible. Hopefully it encourages more detectives to go that extra mile and do that extra work, as if we have any more time to do all that stuff. But
Yeah.
I'm hopeful. Yeah.
Were you ever pulled in anything federal, or with any federal agencies, or did you have to work with any federal agencies for this stuff?
Yeah. So at Phoenix Police Department, we had 2 squads. We did have 3, but then obviously everybody's losing bodies to
Mhm.
patrol. But we had a squad that was on the Innocence Loss FBI task force. And so we've done lots of operations with them, and also HSI. They had a guy assigned to our unit as well. So lots of, joint investigations with them, because a lot of this touches other states. Again, with the whole transient nature of this, you've got traffickers moving. They're not just going to stay in one city. And so we have to work together to, tell the story of what happened for this victim and get them justice.
Yeah, track them down around the country,
Yeah.
if they're moving around. You said, I don't know if you completely, you gave a little bit more. You had said come back to it with a 5-year case. You said we talk about it more later. I don't know if you completely covered everything. You went into it a little bit, but you have anything more about that, or maybe we can kind of wrap on that and make it a little war story.
Yeah. So when I do my community awareness presentations, I typically have that focus of comparing, what we've done better and what's, better because of informed juries. So I talk
Mm-hmm.
about this other case where this girl who was 14 met a trafficker on Moco Space. If you've ever heard of that social media app, it's really bad.
No.
Moco Space, you can buy people, you can buy guns, you can buy drugs. It's really it's kind of like the dark web, but on regular Google. If you work undercover work, having a Moco Space profile is going to help you in any of those areas, buying drugs, all that. But anyway, so she meets
Wow.
this trafficker and he convinces her to run away from home. She's actually a Native American girl that was living in Tucson. And she travels by herself all the way up to Phoenix on a Greyhound bus. And then he ends up having sex with her, traffickers out of Arizona. He follows major events. I found the Google history where he's searching, Intel conferences or, spring training games or places where a lot of men will be. And so he took her out of Arizona into New Mexico and Texas, and then ultimately got caught because he had beat her up, and she told the Pinal County Sheriff's deputies what happened. What's unique about that case is she had contact with law enforcement 2 other times prior to the 3rd time when she finally told us what was up. And that's another unfortunate thing that goes on here where, unless you have people who know how to ask the right questions or can have the skill behind the scenes, even patrol, to build that rapport to get a kid to talk about what's going on, we're going to miss them. And we missed him twice. We missed her twice before finally she told us what was up. Anyway, that case, all that to say, he was offered a sweet plea offer of only 20 years for pimping out a 14-year-old. I mean, that's dangerous crimes against children. That's, really, really a serious thing. So I compare that case when I do this presentation to the case with the 5-year, the 7 victims, the familial trafficking case. And I think I said it already, but that case, 7 months in trial. I testified
Wow.
11 times. I learned so much about being a better detective in that trial, unfortunately. I even wrote a warrant during that trial on some new evidence that we located when we were still in trial. The reason why it took 5 years wasn't because we weren't ready. It was because the defense, unfortunately, they are playing the game of these girls are prostitutes. They're going to go back to prostitution. They're doing drugs. Something could happen to one of them. And then the whole case goes away, especially the main girl who was 13 when her uncle first had sex with her. She was 20 when she testified, 16 when she disclosed. And, they thought she would overdose and die or, get killed in some way. So delay, delay, delay. But anyway, 5 years ultimately, 7-month-long trial. And he was charged with 105 counts. Well, he was charged originally with 130, but unfortunately, because it took 5 years to go to trial, some of the victims who testified didn't remember every detail of what they told us 5 years ago. And so we had to dismiss a couple of charges. But 105 went to the jury and they deliberated for 4 days, and he was found guilty on 101. And that's when, we got the amazing sentence of 493.5 years in prison, which is a record for the United States. So I tell those two stories. I tell them to anyone I present to, so then that way they can see that we are doing better. You don't have, plea offers for 20 years being offered to these guys unless you have a prosecutor that doesn't know what they're doing. And, go ahead and take it to trial because we will still have the outcomes we have because we have the public listening to podcasts like this, learning about human trafficking, and caring to know about what a victim is and all the ins and outs about human trafficking, and then making the decision to hold these guys accountable. So very grateful for any platform that lets me talk about this. So thank you.
No, it's awesome. And I appreciate you for it. For continuing the crusade, even beyond working as a police officer now. It's it's a big deal, and it's interesting because there's only so much that you can truly learn from just regular cinema and watching things in the movies. There's so much more to it, and TV shows can kind of shed a little bit of light on it, but people have to understand a lot more about what goes on, and then you have to be able to learn about the system, because they also generate myths about the system and about the justice system and how it all works. And you learn that over your career in law enforcement, and so my viewers will see that during their careers in law enforcement, but that you got to consistently adapt to it and keep training, and keep learning, and keep your mind open to it on what's going on. So you have a website. I want to at least go over some of those things quick before we wrap up. So you have a website that people can go to, a chance for awareness, right?
Yeah.
.com.
And
that's
last name.
yeah, it works out. It's perfect. And so they can see things like the book, trainings and stuff like that. I had it queued up over here.
Yeah. So I have an online course for anyone who wants to learn about human trafficking. It's called The Power of Awareness, because I've literally witnessed it. And I talk through, victims' vulnerabilities, how they fall into this situation. I go more in depth about sex buyers than we've talked about here. And then obviously the recruiting and grooming by traffickers. And then I have a section about indicators so that people can learn about, well, what if something's happening with someone I know? What could I recognize could be them being involved in trafficking? And I also have a resource on my list, a resource list on my website, my sex trafficking indicators list that they can download. And I also talk through in that Power of Awareness course about how to get involved, because a lot of people want to get involved without being a vigilante, because we have a lot of those going out there and doing their own child predator ops. And obviously that's not helpful for law enforcement, and we're not going to be able to prosecute those cases. So let's stop doing that. But the appropriate way to get involved is also something I talk about. And then I am coming out with a modern day situational awareness class virtually as well. I have had a couple of requests, and I've done some keynotes for some women's conferences, and it was super well received. And they're, wanting their kids to, their college age daughters or their teenagers seen, especially being a female. And so I'm doing that, and that's coming out in February. And then, like I said, I'm translating the book in Spanish and doing an audio book as well. And then, booking for training and consulting. If there's a law enforcement agency that wants to start doing these undercover proactive operations using female decoys, whether we're targeting sex buyers, whether we're chatting with individuals online that are trying to lure minors, where you have the females posing as juveniles, doing undercover chatting. And then obviously the hotel operations, and then a whole other thing with catfishing pimps. And that's a whole other ball game. So I talk a lot about that as part of my female undercover school class that I've done virtually a couple of times now, and that's been pretty well received. I usually advertise that on LinkedIn under my name, Heidi Chance, or on my website, or on my Instagram, which is also _chance_for_awareness, because I didn't realize the space was an underscore.
It kind of, it's hard, especially when you're trying to grab a hold of the same name or the same thing on all social media platforms. You end up having to do that. But I'll put all that stuff down in the contents for the YouTube video, and then as well on the audio side for Spotify and iTunes and stuff. All that'll be in there. So cool. Well, and then there's a TikTok. I'm seeing the TikTok logo, Pinterest logo. You gotta be on everything. You gotta dabble in everything, unfortunately, to be able to everybody has their own version of how they want to see things. So it's got to be out there. So, all right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. This was really cool. It was good hearing from you. And the topic is, it's pretty deep. There's a lot to it. And so, So thank you very much for coming on.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
All right, just hang out and then we'll wrap this one up. And
Calling all units, calling all units. Donut shop has a fresh dozen. Go ahead and take a 1040.